Welcome back to another week of furniture building this week. I started off the week not sure what direction I wanted to go in, and since it is the holiday season, it's a little bit slower around here, so I decided that I would just go ahead and continue building the set of furniture that is going to live in my house. Last week I built that long dresser, actually I built two of them, to match that taller style of dresser. And this week I want to continue that set and build the matching nightstands. Again, I wanted to build two sets of nightstands, so 4 total, and keep it in the same design and stain. This should go relatively smoothly because I've already built the dressers, and so I already know the wood species I'm going to use. I know the general design plan I want to go with, as well as the stain and color that I want to use for these nightstands. So come along with me and I will bring you along the process of building, creating, designing, coming up with the ideas for this set. So come along with me this week as I build the 4 nightstands that will complete the matching set of furniture. My first step, just like it was for the dresser, was to grab a piece of graph paper and really start mapping out the different components and the way I expect these nightstands to be constructed. I did a very rough draw out and then did a count with the different dimensions of the different pieces that I will need so that I can map out the pieces of plywood and make sure that I'm cutting with the least amount of waste possible. So with my cut list and my material list, I went off to the hardware store and picked up the lumber that I knew I would need for this. I am using red oak in this situation, so I'm grabbing some red oak lumber. When it comes to constructing the legs, I typically get 2x2s, which when it's all said and done are 1.5 by 1.5, but they did not have them in 2-foot lengths, and that's roughly how long I need them to be. So I would have to buy the 3-foot pieces, and it was a lot of money and a lot of excess material that I did not need. So what I decided to do instead is buy 1x2s. And what I will do is I will glue them together. I'll clamp them together, glue them, so that I have 2x2s at the end of the day. I want to go ahead and do this first because it's going to take some time for that glue to set up. If I can get them all glued and clamped, I can let them sit for a little bit. I've got my sheet of 4x8 oak plywood set down on my sawhorses, so I'm ready to get cutting. I lucked out, and in order to build 4 nightstands or the 2 pair, I will be able to get all of the material that I need for the body of the nightstands out of 1 piece of plywood, plus the few scraps that I have left over from building the dressers last week. I am going to use my rip cut guide and set my saw to 16 inches because that is the depth that I want them to be. and I'm going to rip this piece of plywood down by 16 inches, and that should handle all 4 tops. Continuing along with my rip cut, I am going to cut 2 more pieces lengthwise, ripped the long way across the piece of plywood. Both of those pieces are going to be 11.5 inches, and that will take care of the sides that I need for all 4 pieces, so 8 sides total. With those long strips of pieces of plywood, I now can take my table saw and start chopping them down to the actual dimensions that I need them to be. So this will take care of both of the tops for all 4 nightstands as well as the sides of all 4 nightstands. With that glue all cured on the legs, I can take the clamps off and start preparing them to be cut down. I find it easiest to grab a heat gun anytime I'm looking to remove these stickers from raw wood. They can really adhere to the wood grain and be a mess to remove. Just a little bit of heat added to that adhesive really loosens it up and gets it off cleanly. The total height of these nightstands is going to be 24 inches tall, but since I'm having 1.5 inches for a top, I do have to cut them a little bit smaller than that. The most important key is making sure they are all the same size. You don't want one leg a little bit longer than all the rest. Before I get my sander out and start sanding all the different components of these nightstands, I do want to go ahead and edge band the tops. This is an iron-on edge banding, so the glue gets activated with heat. It's pretty easy to use and just makes plywood edges look finished and like a solid piece of wood. The last step that I want to do before I get to sanding all of these pieces is to drill my pocket holes. I'm going to drill them on the back side of the side panels. I'm going to do several along the sides that will attach the legs to either side, and then I will also do a couple from the top, and that will help me attach the top to the actual nightstand body itself. And if I didn't create enough sawdust with cutting all these pieces, I'm gonna get to work on sanding all the components. I'm grabbing a 220 grit sandpaper and really focusing on those edges. And when it comes to the legs, I grab something a little bit more abrasive. Right here is actually an 80 grit, and my goal and purpose with the rougher grit and texture is to even out those seams. If there's one edge that's slightly more raised than the other from where I join those two boards together, I want to remove that, as well as any residual wood glue that might have squeezed out. With everything nice and smooth now, I'm gonna start laying out the side panels. So this will be the top edge and this will be the bottom. And I do want a little bit of a lip between the edge of the side panel and the edge of the actual legs. So I'm gonna put a thin spacer board between. And I'm also gonna use wood glue to hold everything all together, as well as those pocket holes. Sometimes the pocket holes can move around a little bit, especially with the wood glue introduced in the mix. So a clamp always helps to hold everything tight while screwing. And that's one side done. Only 7 more to go. Next up on the table saw are the pieces that I'm going to be cutting down and using as the trim components and the stringers that hold the sides together and create that box shape for the actual cavity of the nightstands themselves. They're all getting cut down to be about 1.5 inches wide, and then I will go ahead and edge band all the edges that will be exposed. While I'm at it with the table saw, I did want to rip down the long boards that will be the drawer faces so that I don't accidentally use any pieces of plywood that I had set aside for this particular purpose. And it also helps me know what I have left over for excess that I can use for these little trim pieces. I do want to make sure to edge band all of the center dividers that go between the drawers so that they look like solid pieces of wood and look more finished. I want the drawer trim to be on the same level as this side panel where it ends. So I'm going to mark off 5 inches on each leg. And that's where I will install the trim. Because these drawer trim pieces were relatively narrow, I was really only able to fit one pocket hole on either side, which is not going to hold it very straight. That's where the wood glue comes in. That wood glue, once it cures, is really going to hold everything firm and prevent that board from pivoting back and forth. So with plenty of wood glue on that edge, I can use my clamp and those pocket holes to really hold everything together while it dries and cures. Those clamps are really truly a lifesaver. They're that extra set of hands that you definitely need. I really wanted to make sure that all of these drawer trim pieces were exactly the same size. The last thing that I want is for one to be a little bit too short or a little bit too long. That's why I took such care to cut them all at the same time with my table saw so that they're all identical. I want a nice snug fit. On that first nightstand, it's so important to get all of your measurements correct, and I took my time to really map out and make sure that those 3 drawer boxes are exactly the same distance apart from each other. I don't want to have different drawer sizes. I want it to all be the same and cohesive. So with just a couple taps of my hammer to get those trim pieces in place, I was able to clamp it up and screw everything in to create a nice, strong, and sturdy nightstand cabinet. When getting the tops prepared, I edge banded all of the sides. I'm cutting and installing an accent trim. This is almost going to create a floating effect or a tiered effect on the top. I'm creating this look using 2-inch wide boards just along the inside perimeter of that top, set in about 1/2 inch on all sides. I'm going to use plenty of wood glue and some pin nails just to hold it in place while that wood glue cures. I did this same exact look on the long dresser and used the taller dresser that was an antique as an inspiration for this idea. The top gets held in place using the pocket holes that were previously drilled into those side panels, and this just really helps to hold everything in place and keeps things steady, allowing me to countersink some wood screws into the top and back edge on those trim boards. This will help to prevent any unwanted gapping anywhere on the perimeter of these tops. I also had some leftover backer board material from the previous dresser builds, so I cut them to size and I'm using them at this time to staple onto the backs of all 4 of these nightstands. This is just really going to make sure everything is nice and squared up and give some rigidity. Taking those long strips that I cut earlier, I'm going to finish cutting the drawer boxes now that I have the exact dimensions those interior drawer faces will need to slide into. I'm going to use that same heat activated iron-on edge banding on the top and the two sides of all of these drawer faces. I want to give it that really nice completed look. After all that is glued down and cured, I can cut away any of the excess and eventually sand them all smooth, making sure that there's no imperfections. If there are any little knots, I will take this opportunity to fill in those areas with a similar colored wood filler. Because there's a gap between that 3/4 inch plywood panel and the 1.5 inch legs, I am using some scrap material just to glue and tack down in place in order to install the drawer tracks. I want those drawer tracks to be evenly spaced and not have any bumps or lips that they have to go up and over, and this solves that issue. I will do this on both sides for all 4 nightstands. And luckily for this, I can just use whatever scrap material I have left. The last large thing to cut are all of the drawer boxes. So I'm taking my rip cut saw and cutting them all down, creating 48 total drawer box sides. There are 12 drawers and each drawer has 4 sides. This is pretty tedious and there's a lot of cuts, but it's a lot of repetitive work. I'm gonna follow the same staining process that I used on the other 2 dressers from last week to finish up these nightstands. That process starts with a water-based stain. This one is Special Walnut. It's by Behr. It worked pretty well to just get that first layer of color down, and then I will use a tinted top coat to finish out that color. Now that that first coat of stain is on and completely cured, I'm going to go in and top coat it just with a clear top coat, just to seal everything in before I start adding more color and richening the look of these. With that initial clear coat completely cured down, I am going to buff the entire surface down with a very fine grit sandpaper. And then I can get to the really exciting part, which is getting that chocolatey color on all of these wooden nightstands. I showed this process in depth in my last video. All I do is take a little bit of dark water-based paint and I mix it very well in with my top coat, and I do light, even coats of this to build up a richer, darker, warmer color. That's really the look that I'm going for in the end. You could do as many coats of this as you want. This is coat number 2 right here, and you can see with each subsequent coat that color just becomes richer and richer. I did a total of 3 coats of this to really build up that color that I was looking for in the end. The last step is to assemble all of the drawer boxes. I'm going to do this using pocket holes on both sides of both the front and the back board. By doing it in these 2 positions, they will never be seen. The front one will be hidden by the drawer front, and the back will be at the very back of the drawer box, and nobody will ever see it. It will be behind the actual drawer box itself. I took a 220 grit sandpaper and really went carefully and smoothed out all of the edges. The last thing I want is any splintery bits. I'm using that same drawer lining that I used for all the rest of the pieces. I really like this drawer lining. I think it complements the finished piece very well. In this particular situation, I did opt to cut and install this drawer liner before actually putting the drawer boxes together themselves. This worked pretty well because I didn't have to take my razor blade and try to cut out those inside corners, which can be so tricky sometimes. The only issue I could see running across would be if those channels along the inside edge of the drawer boxes were too tight, and it might cause the drawer paper to snag. But in my situation, I had enough room to let it glide in smoothly. Attaching those drawer boxes together using those pocket holes can be a little tedious, a little difficult. It's definitely easier with smaller drawer boxes like these. The bigger ones can get a little cumbersome, a little heavy, but just take your time and make sure that all of your edges are lined up nicely. It's time to start installing these drawer tracks, and it's a pretty tight space in here, but I think it's going to be manageable. Now, it would have been a lot easier if I had not attached the backer board already, but I like to do that because it keeps things square and really stabilizes the piece pretty well. But if you don't have the back on already, it does make easier access, that's for sure. Now that I have that first screw and I can take off my spacer block, and it makes the visibility a little bit better. And I do want to make sure to get this level. I like to line the tracks that actually attach to the drawers themselves along the bottom. Because I make the drawer boxes not quite as wide as the actual opening itself, it gives me a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to installing. And if I line them up with the bottom, I do know they're even on both sides. These handle templates are a lifesaver. They save so much time. They have all the most common hole dimensions, and you just center it wherever you want it to go and drill little pilot holes. In this situation, I am just drilling small little holes in the beginning and using those areas to actually drive in some wood screws. And these wood screws are going to be what holds the drawer face in place while I am able to drill from the back side and really attach that drawer face permanently to the drawer box itself. Once that's done, I can remove those wood screws from the front and finish installing the actual hardware. And with those handles finally being installed, that means these pieces are all wrapped up. Finally, this journey is over. Took me several weeks. It was a fun, creative process. Let's take a look at these nightstands. I think they are a perfect match for those other two dressers and something slightly different than I've done before. Whenever I'm building pieces, it's much more enjoyable for me if they're a little bit different than pieces I've created in the past. I always use the same or similar techniques to create new pieces of furniture, but it's just that much more gratifying for me if I get to create something that's a little bit different. I get to stretch my creativity in a slightly different way. These are absolutely beautiful. I hope that they find a great home with somebody who appreciates them. If you liked this video, please feel free to give it a like, comment down below, and check out some of my other videos, perhaps the dressers that I created previously. Thank you so much for watching.